You are watching the AI arms race quietly change its battlefield, and the first casualties won't be soldiers or scientists, but venture capital firms. Washington has stopped pretending that chip export controls alone can slow down Chinese artificial intelligence. If you follow the money, you will see a much sharper strategy taking shape, and the first casualty is already on the board. American regulators recently expanded sanctions to directly target AI-focused venture funds, proving that Washington has realized code cannot be blocked, but capital can be frozen. This is the single most consequential shift in the global tech war. The United States is deliberately choking the funding that buys compute. When a startup cannot raise a single dollar from global investors, its training runs stall before they even begin, proving that capital is the real choke point. That funding shortage exposes the core of the Chinese AI model, which relies on what experts call compute arbitrage. Startups pool state-backed liquidity and cheap electricity to train massive models faster than Western firms can afford. But now that capital pipeline is being systematically severed. How do you scale intelligence when your bank accounts are suddenly flagged by compliance officers in 3 different time zones? Chinese developers responded by decentralizing their infrastructure, spinning up off-grid server clusters in remote provinces, and routing training workloads through domestic power grids. They swapped proprietary software stacks for open-source frameworks to avoid export restrictions. Yet this workaround creates a new bottleneck because distributed training requires flawless network synchronization that simply does not exist at scale. American regulators escalated by expanding secondary sanctions, forcing global banks to choose between Chinese AI clients and access to the dollar clearing system. The result is a compliance bottleneck that strangles cross-border deals before they reach a signature. Now, even mid-tier investors are quietly shutting down AI portfolios to avoid regulatory audits, leaving a massive funding vacuum. This financial siege does not just isolate China. It fractures the entire global innovation ecosystem. European and Asian startups suddenly face stricter scrutiny when hiring talent or purchasing cloud credits. The race for artificial intelligence is no longer about who writes the best algorithms, but who can legally move the capital required to train them. The mechanism behind this pivot is surprisingly mechanical. Washington updated its export control guidelines to classify advanced training frameworks and high-bandwidth interconnect software as dual-use technology. That single classification change allows the Commerce Department to restrict code distribution alongside physical chips. When software becomes a controlled commodity, open collaboration collapses overnight, forcing developers to rebuild their stacks from scratch. Chinese startups are adapting by accelerating domestic semiconductor adoption and pivoting toward parameter-efficient fine-tuning rather than foundational model training. They are building leaner architectures that require less raw compute while maintaining competitive performance on specialized tasks. But efficiency gains cannot fully replace the sheer training hours that Western labs still command, creating a persistent performance gap. The paradox is stark. Every new restriction forces Beijing to double down on sovereign infrastructure, creating a parallel AI stack that will eventually outgrow American export lists. Yet building that parallel stack costs billions in redundant research and sacrifices the rapid iteration that comes from global open-source exchange. Who pays the price for that technological decoupling, and how long can parallel stacks survive without global exchange? For developers and investors, the real shift is already happening in how AI projects are structured and financed. The era of burning billions on unconstrained training runs is ending, replaced by a focus on resilient compute supply chains and regionally isolated data pipelines. If you want to survive the next cycle, you will need to understand infrastructure risk before you ever write a single line of code. The United States did not target Chinese AI startups to stop espionage. It targeted them to break a funding model that threatened American technological dominance. The real AI race is now a financial siege, fought in compliance departments and capital markets rather than on silicon fabs. Watch where the money flows, because that will always dictate who actually builds the future.